The year is 1958. It's a time when Mao Zedong sees himself as a god. This ignorant, power-hungry man and his team made a simple observation. They saw sparrows eating grains that fell to the ground. They made a very simple deduction. Sparrows eat grain, so these sparrows must be eating the grain from the fields. And they thought, this is why we can't meet our quotas. And that's where things go off the rails. An order known as Kill the Birds of Mao is sent throughout the country. It says to hunt down and kill all the sparrows in the country. Couldn't be anything more foolish, right? But it happened. And the Chinese people, who had become like robots, carried it out with great honor. Tens of millions of birds are killed, and this event is celebrated as a great success. But in the years following this inhumane massacre, there would be a horrifying consequence. It is said that there was a slight increase in production in the first harvest after the birds were killed, but a tiny increase. Of course, while Mao and his cabinet thought that this would lead to even more growth in the future, a different problem began to emerge. In fact, something began to happen that seemed like it came straight out of the stories told in the Bible and the Torah. An endless infestation of locusts and insects. The insects, whose natural predators were birds, had multiplied abnormally because they had been eradicated across the country. Of course, so did the mice that fed on them, and they literally invaded the country. The devastation this caused was unimaginable, from the crops in the fields to the products in the warehouses. Insects and mice attacked and consumed everything. China hastily began importing millions of sparrows from its neighbor Russia, but it was too late. The agricultural production system had collapsed. The breakdown of the food chain began to hit millions of industrial workers like a tsunami. And this chain of events turned China, which had a population of about 800 million at the time, into a living hell. As the food crisis deepened, the Mao administration began to write off the people in the countryside. In order to keep the industry going, basic food exports, especially from the Russians, peaked. But as I said, this food was brought in more to maintain order in the cities, so the Chinese government chose the communes in the villages that could not meet their production quotas as the first category for elimination. And they almost completely stopped food aid to those areas. Of course, what happened next was horrific. People consumed all the living creatures in the area before they starved to death. Over time, livestock and wildlife in the areas reached the point of collapse. By the way, don't think of this consumption as something nice like hunting, cleaning, cooking, and eating. Look, we're not talking about 3 to 5 people here. We are talking about millions of hungry people fighting to survive. When the devastation of these 3 horrific years, as told by the survivors of the famine, reached its peak, people would tear apart and eat any living thing they saw in nature, just like wild animals, because there was no time to clean and cook. Survivors say that such a waste of time meant that others would see the food and steal it from you. So what do you think happened when the animals ran out? People started eating insects, grass, plants, tree bark, and even mud. And finally, each other.